Sarup Bhatnagar Prize in 2017, which is the highest honor given to an Indian scientist. Apart from that, he got Indian National Science Academy INSA Young Scientist Medal 2006, Young Associate of Indian Academy of Sciences 2007, National Academy of Sciences NASI Young Scientist Platinum Jubilee Award in Physical Sciences, NASI Scopus Young Scientist Award from Elsevier, Swarna Jayanti Fellowship, founder member chosen by the INSA Council of Indian National Young Academy of Science, New Delhi, Associate Editor of Journal of Earth Science, Springer, and the Indian Academy of Science since 2016. Recently, he got the fellowship of Indian Academy of Sciences 221. So apart from all these, he has been a regular member of our doctoral committee. He helped us during the selection of our PhD students, and above all, he helped us in framing the syllabus of space physics. I mean, he spent so many hours to get us a good syllabus for the space physics, especially the first paper that is called atmospheric physics. So with this introduction, so I invite you to our special lecture for the MSc students, mostly for the MSc students. Thank you. Please, sir.
Thank you, Subodh sir, for giving this opportunity to talk to MSc students and MPhil students of University of Kerala. I think I am audible. I am clear, all of you.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I will now share my screen first, and then I will start. So the screen is visible to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I will be basically talking on aerosols and climate, but based on interaction with Subodh sir, I understand that this is basically an orientation talk. So I will connect it to the relevance of atmospheric physics in today's world, the scientific community, and the opportunities, basically because this talk is mainly meant for the master's students in physics. So the opportunities available in this particular area of research, not only at aerosols and climate, atmospheric physics in general. Since I mostly spend my time on aerosols and climate, I will talk on aerosols and climate to you as a scientific, it's a general talk, basically a preliminary talk, which will be very, it's basically I gave this kind of talks for very general audience, but I'm sorry that you will be a little more specialized, but for your talk is required for you. But since it is an orientation program and it's the first talk, I thought I will give a general talk. So I'll, in between, I can discuss with you on the opportunities. You can interrupt me at any time and discuss on this. So I'll be spending time up to 11 o'clock. So next one, almost an hour, we will discuss. So my area of research, Subodh sir has introduced me little very generously. Thanks for such a generous introduction. So I work on aerosols and climate. This is actually an emerging area. In fact, when I started doing research in this field, and now it is getting a lot of maturity, and it is one of the very hot topic in atmospheric physics area. So before going into that, let me introduce my lab, basically the space physics laboratory where I am working. Here in space physics laboratory, we work on right from surface of Earth to upper atmosphere and even planetary atmosphere. We have several ground-based instrumentation facility, as well as we use high-altitude balloons, rockets, then of course satellite data. We know that we have several satellites in orbit to observe Earth, all these databases are available to us, whether it is belongs to NASA, ESA, or even our own ISRO's satellite data is available for scientific research. So we all know that the satellite has only the capability to measure the radiance received by its sensor. So the meaningful parameters retrieval from this radiance received by the satellite sensor itself is a big scientific problem. And now with the very efficient mathematical tools, now we are in a position to retrieve the different compositions of atmosphere. Then about we all know that the climate change itself we could delineate the possible reasons for the future climate change with the help of satellite data, whether it is the global temperature, whether it is the carbon dioxide distribution, whether the cloud pattern. Even we all know that the cyclone prediction is now become accurate with the help of satellite observations, space-bound observations. We can see every day our inside pictures. Inside pictures every 3 hours we can get the cloud movements. And so these are the advantage with the advent of modern technology. Now we need to connect this technology to application. We need physics, support of physics and mathematics. And of course, basically physics is most important because we need to convert this information which is available for the satellite to a meaningful parameters only with the help of physical principles. Physics, the applied physics area, and that is the area where we all are working here. So for that, we need to have very good understanding on the atmosphere, the processes in the atmosphere. We know that atmosphere is a very delicate, very thin compared to the, if you look at the radius of the Earth, we know that it's around 6,500 or so kilometers. So if you look at that, the atmosphere is around 100 kilometers also. So it is a very thin layer compared to the size of the Earth, and it is very delicate. So any small change in that will have a big impact on the life on the Earth. So understanding the atmosphere and the processes in the atmosphere is very important for a sustainable world. So there is a lot of scientific research is going not only in India, all over the world, and all international scientific community is very eager to look for such changes in the Earth atmosphere and the related processes. So coming back to SPL again, I have shown, this is a very schematic picture just to get a feel. We can see that a lot of instruments, it's not placed, not like this, it is just to show these are the instruments which is available for probing the atmosphere. For example, there is first one you can see here, SODAR. I think the cursor movement you can see. So here I have shown SODAR. SODAR is basically used to probe the lower atmosphere. Means atmosphere is divided into, you all have studied already in some lower classes, the different layers. The bottommost layer is called troposphere, which extends from surface of Earth to about 18 kilometers in tropical region. Tropical region means near to the equator, 23.5 degree to the north and south, we call tropics, where we get solar radiation, intense solar radiation. All the solar energy availability is quite high because of the orbital and the about that, the wave tropics and all. So now from 18 kilometer to 50 kilometer we have stratosphere, and that is the region where the ozone is quite significant. We all know that this ozone layer is protecting us from the harmful ultraviolet radiation reaching the surface and can create kind of physiological issues to us. Then we have a mesosphere, which is from 50 kilometers to 85 kilometers, which is the coldest region in the atmosphere, where temperature is very low. And then we have above 85 kilometers, we have the thermosphere, which extends up to 1,000 kilometers or so. So this is roughly the atmosphere. Here we can say that the up to 85 to about 100 kilometers, we have the 85 kilometers, we can say it is the neutral atmosphere, where the atmosphere is neutral basically, and above 85 kilometers it is ionized medium because of the energetic ultraviolet radiation coming from sun, which interacts with the oxygen molecules or hydrogen, and it dissociates and form ions. So atomic oxygen or protons and electrons are And that's why it is called ionosphere also. This thermospheric region also known as ionosphere. And we have satellites. We have two types of satellites we know based on its orbits thing. Basically, one is polar orbiting satellites and the geostationary satellites. Polar orbiting satellites, we know that it is around from 600 kilometers to around 800 kilometers, depending on the orbital repeativity which we need and other requirements. Based on the requirements, we place satellites in polar orbiting at different altitudes. And the geostationary satellite, so geostationary satellites, which is placed at around 36,000 kilometers, which we know that it possesses around the orbit around the Earth with the same orbital speed as the precession of our Earth around its axis. So we always see geostationary satellite at a fixed place, and so that if you want to observe a particular location or particular region continuously for a longer duration, you need geostationary satellite. But see, the issues with this is we know that for a satellite to be in geostationary orbit, it has to be placed at around 36,000 kilometers from the Earth, because you need to balance the orbital conditions and all. So when satellite is far from the Earth, especially around 36,000 kilometers, what will happen? The intensity received by the sensor at a far distance. We know that as the photons reaches such a far distance, there is an inverse square law. Their intensity will be reduced by 1 by r square. So the intensity will be very small. So what we call there is a term called signal to noise ratio. So the signal to noise ratio will be very poor for a signal received at a geostationary satellite. But if you need to have very high resolution pictures of a region or high resolution information, you need to have very close satellites to be placed at a very close altitude, or the orbit should be very close to the Earth. So that has to be in polar orbiting. But there, the polar orbiting is you don't have the visibility of the satellite all the time, because it takes around, in polar orbiting satellites will take around 90 minutes to complete one orbit. So by that time, your Earth also will be rotating. And so when the next orbit comes, our location will, because the repeativity will be once in 16 orbit also. So the same location will be seen after few days. So if you want to, so what we do is actually we take this data and then we have to stitch. So if you have about 10 days of polar orbiting satellite, we get a global picture. Or 5 or 6 depends on several parameters, because when satellite is looking, it will be looking for a region which we call it a swath. So over a large region, and if you take multiple orbits, you get a regional picture for a polar orbiting satellite. But from the geostationary satellite, we can have a larger picture, but signal to noise ratio will be poor. So depending on the requirement, we need to place sensors at different orbits, and and the sensors also will be of different types. So actually, remote sensing is another topic which we can discuss, which is, so once we get the information, to retrieve the information, we should have very thorough understanding of the processes within the atmosphere or the Earth's surface. So that's a art of remote sensing. The physics of remote sensing is quite interesting, and which today there are several institutes which handles this kind of studies in India. For the remote sensing, we have in ISRO called National Remote Sensing Center in Hyderabad. And there is another institute in Dehradun called Indian Institute of Remote Sensing, IIRS, where they give training for students, master's students. Those who are interested can join there for MTech program, which is a UN-funded program it was. I don't know now also whether it is. There used to be a lot of international students also participate. And they get MTech degree from some important universities, but IIRS handles this course. So after MSc, some of the students go for such MTech courses. And there are several MTech courses for after MSc Physics. You can try in IITs for remote sensing based MTech courses, even in atmospheric physics also, and which give you a transformation from your normal thing to a applied area, and then you can try out physics PhD in this or PhD in atmospheric physics at different places. So there are some opportunities which after MSc you can look for in the area of remote sensing. And today, with the new policy on the space policy also changing, so there will be a lot of opportunities comes in the private sector also on the use of remote sensing data, where the physics students with a good mathematical skill and programming skill will be able to do a very good job. So this is one area about the remote sensing. The other area is actually SPL involved is we work on the atmosphere of other planets. You all know that there were the recent missions like Chandrayaan 1, Chandrayaan 2, and then Mars mission, and the Aditya mission is now coming up to Sun to study the Sun, and several other missions are now under discussions like the Venus mission, and of course in future it may be to Jupiter and Saturn, not in the near future but in far future. But there are several such missions by other space agencies, like of course NASA had already several missions, and ESA, European Space Agency, and Japanese group. So this database is also available in the present day world for us to work on. So there is a lot of opportunities to work on other planets and planetary atmosphere and its evolution, different aspects of that. And then SPL works on the numerical weather prediction models and modeling studies on the atmosphere, which is basically in the first few kilometers in the tropospheric region. And we use different tools. We have tools to study. We have something called radars, different types of radars. Then LiDARs, instead of radio waves, we use laser beams for probing the atmosphere up to 35 to 40 kilometers. We use rockets to study the mesosphere. Mesosphere is one region. Our friends used to call it as ignorosphere. Our information understanding on the mesosphere is still poor because of the lack of data. Getting data from mesospheric region is very difficult because this is one region where its density is very low, but temperature is also very low. And to keep an object in that region is very difficult. We need to use only rockets. So rocket is one of the best way to probe, but you know that rocket is an expensive thing, and its duration also. You have to have multiple rockets, to get a lot of data on this. But one area which people now in our lab is called meteor wind radar. There are a lot of meteor showers which enters the atmosphere. In mesosphere, it interacts with the medium, and with the radar we can track those meteors and the meteor trail, and we can study the wind speed, and of course we can derive even temperatures and things like that of the mesosphere. Such studies are also going on. So the balloons, when we talk about, we have a facility in Hyderabad called the TAFR High Altitude Balloon Facility. I have extensively used that facility to study the atmosphere, which these balloons can go up to about 35 to 40 kilometers with a payload weight of about 500 kilograms. After 10 payloads, we can lift it to stratosphere. So on the lifting of those payloads, we can probe the atmosphere up to stratosphere, and while coming down with the help of parachute also, so we can profile the atmosphere with very sophisticated instrumentations to understand different processes and properties of the atmosphere. In the world, very few facilities exist for high altitude balloon which can take very heavy payloads. The TAFR balloon facility at Hyderabad is one such balloon facility, and we have aircrafts to study. But aircraft, we can probe up to about 8 to 10 kilometers with the help of aircraft. We have one aircraft in ISRO, which is maintained by National NRSC at Hyderabad. I have extensively used this aircraft to study, which is very interesting, to probe the atmosphere with the help of aircraft with very sophisticated instrumentation, and then we can study different processes and properties with the help of the theoretical understanding of the process. So there is another domain is a microwave area. We have different, because basically to probe the atmosphere, we use the entire electromagnetic spectrum, right from ultraviolet. Of course, gamma rays and X-rays we don't use for atmospheric studies, but from ultraviolet to radio waves, we use ultraviolet UV rays. Then visible, of course, we have LiDARs and the spectrometers, spectroradiometers, and things like that. We have infrared is another area where infrared spectroscopy is heavily used in atmospheric science. And we know that we have a wide infrared region, far near infrared, far infrared, and very far infrared, like even thermal infrared region. So all these regions are used. You know that carbon dioxide probing is basically with the help of infrared in the infrared domain in the 10 micrometer region. So you have studied in your spectroscopy classes on the carbon dioxide spectra in the infrared region, which is very efficiently used in these studies, especially your rotational bands in the microwave region is used to study probe the carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere. Then, of course, microwave is another area which is a very upcoming, understanding on the microwave remote sensing and the micro radiative transfer, because the visible and infrared, one issues with the remote sensing, when it is cloudy, it's very difficult to get information in the visible, almost impossible in the visible, and infrared also it is difficult to get information on. So microwave can probe through clouds. If you want to study the surface of the earth, even during cloudy conditions, we can use microwaves. So there are something called synthetic aperture radars. There is another very big project is coming up is with the NASA and ISRO called NISA, which is a synthetic aperture radar to study the surface of the Earth. So much of information which is now coming up. The physics is one tool which can be very effectively used to probe atmosphere or space or other planetary atmosphere. Is the understanding of the physics of this problem. So with this introduction, I will just move to our science. We all know that when we talk about climate, basically, the most important two parameters actually the sun-earth interaction. We know that sun is having a photospheric temperature about 6,000 degrees Celsius, and Earth mean temperature is around 15 degrees Celsius. In Kelvin, we can say about 288 Kelvin for the Earth temperature, but for similarly for the sun also, which is of course 6,000 degrees Celsius, so whether it is in Kelvin or Celsius. So you know that with the help of Planck's radiation law, which you have studied in your school classes, that you can derive the spectral distribution of the intensity from a black body or any body which emits temperature. If you know the temperature of the body, we can derive the spectral distribution of the intensity emitted from that body. So with the help of Planck's radiation law, we can derive the peak intensity for sun as well as Earth. With this, we can calculate, when we estimate the peak intensity, means the wavelength corresponds to the maximum intensity. We can see that for sun, it is the sun's radiation peaks at around 500 nanometer, or in micrometer we call 0.5 micrometer. This is a very important information. We know that when we look at the spectral distribution of the solar radiation, we know that about 44% of the solar radiation is in visible region, and around 37% in near infrared, which is from 0.7 micrometer to roughly around 1.5 or so. So if you take a full entire infrared spectrum, we can say that around 49% of the radiation, 49% of solar radiation is in the infrared region, 44% in the visible, and around 7% in the ultraviolet. Ultraviolet also different types of ultraviolet, harmful and harmless. Some of the ultraviolet radiation reaches Earth also. We say that morning sun we need to expose to get our vitamin D, where this harmless UV helps us to for those things, and we know that all those information. So this is about the spectral radiation of solar radiation. When we look at this spectral radiation of sorry, only one. Hello. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I forgot to keep the phone down. So. Yeah. So I'll start. The solar radiation. I was talking about the solar radiation. So this is the spectral distribution of the energy from solar radiation. And if you look at the Earth radiation, which is, we know that Earth, I told you the mean temperature of Earth is around 288 Kelvin. So if you with the help of Planck's radiation law, if you estimate the peak intensity, it is around 10 micrometer. So that you need to keep in mind this information, that the solar radiation peaks at around 0.5 micrometer and Earth radiation peaks at around 10 micrometer, which is, we call it as, the Earth's radiation is called terrestrial radiation, and the other one is the shortwave radiation from the solar radiation, so from the sun. So this is the energy which is with us. If you look at the relative intensity, if you look, you can see that, the Earth radiation, the energy intensity is very, very small, which is only 1% or less than 1% of what we receive from, not even 1%, very less compared to the solar radiation. So now, how it is distributed, this energy. You know that you have studied solar constant. Solar constant is nothing but the mean energy received at one astronomical unit, which is basically the mean summer distance. The energy received per meter square is around 1368 watts per meter square. We receive every time, every second. 3,368 watt of energy is receiving at the top of the atmosphere at a given time, all the time, which is called solar constant. And we know that our Earth is a spherical in shape. So at a given time, the entire 4 pi r square is not exposed to sun. We know that because when when you keep a bowl and put torch on the bowl, the entire spherical bowl will not be illuminated. So if radius of Earth is around is considered as r, let us say it is r, the area exposed to sun is only pi r square. But we know that the total area of sphere is 4 pi r square. So the total energy received at a given time is the energy received in pi r square area. That means 1368 multiplied by pi r square. And this entire energy is distributed for the entire Earth for pi r square area. So the average energy received is nothing but 1368 into pi r square divided by 4 pi r square. That is 1368 divided by 4, which is equal to 342 watts per meter square. So the energy received by the Earth at a given time, the average energy is only 342 watts per meter square. So this 342 watts per meter square is the energy for the entire Earth atmospheric system to function. This is the only energy input. All other energy which we produce is nothing compared to this energy, because it's very small, because the biggest energy source for us is this sun. And this energy is used for different processes in the atmosphere. If you take this 342 as the 100%, then you can, with the help of continuous observation all over the world by ground-based and satellite-based observation, now we have a understanding on the energy balance. We know that if you keep on giving energy to a system, the entropy will keep on increasing. It will go to an non-equilibrium state, and this system will not be sustainable. But we know that our Earth atmospheric system is a very sustainable system, even though there is a perturbation called climate change. But so far we are able to adjust. That means it's a sustainable system where there is a balance exists. That means the 342 watts per meter square energy received by the Earth atmospheric system is balanced by the energy lost to space. So what is received is actually should be equal to what is lost to space. Even the energy wavelength may be same, wavelength may be different, but if you take the whole energy transfer within the system, it should balance. So out of 342 watts per meter square, around 30% of the 342 is just reflected back. And that is reflected by 26% by the atmosphere and 4% reflected from surface. Surface means Earth surface. So understanding this reflection is very important, reflection or scattering. So 30% of the 342 watts per meter square is just reflected or scattered to space. If you have a satellite on the top of the Earth, continuously if you observe, you get this, you can calculate this, and we were doing some of our, these are all available information now from space. But the issue here is actually if there is an increase in this 30% reflection or there is a reduction, then the balance will be disturbed. That's what we are doing by increasing the amount of carbon dioxide or by changing the composition of the atmosphere, we are disturbing this balance. So, okay, the 30% is reflected or scattered. What happened to the rest of the 70%? Rest of the 70%, 23% is, as of now, our understanding is absorbed by the atmosphere. It can be absorption by the cloud, it can be absorption by the gaseous envelope, by the different species present in the atmosphere, and so on. And around 47% is absorbed by the Earth. So the earth absorption depends on the type of soil, it depends on the type of vegetation, it depends on the ocean surface, the ocean state of the ocean, the composition of the ocean. A lot of parameters are there. So the 70% of absorption from the sun, which is happening in the short wave radiation starting from ultraviolet to far infrared, the radiation we are receiving in this wavelength, around 70% is absorbed. The system is maintained that way. It has evolved to a level of that. So now it has to be balanced. This 70% in the short wave should be balanced. So what is happening? There is a lot of processes is happening in the atmosphere. There is, we will know, an important process which is happening in the atmosphere is the greenhouse effect, which traps the long wave radiation. We know that any body which absorbs radiation will emit the same amount of energy, watts, but wavelength can be different. So here the earth will absorb the radiation in short wave. It will emit in the long wave terrestrial radiation. We saw that in the 10 micrometer is the wavelength, peak wavelength. In that radiation wavelength band, earth continuously emits. But this radiation will be trapped within the system by the greenhouse gases and keep the atmosphere warm. And thereby there is a radiative transfer process is happening. But effectively, if you measure the terrestrial radiation from outside there, we can say that 70% of the energy which is absorbed is getting re-radiated or emitted in long wave radiation back to space. So there is a balance. If you take the entire spectrum, you can see that there is a balance. But within the atmospheric system, we have greenhouse effect, we have something like a cloud formation, we have a lot of latent heat processes we have studied in thermodynamics. So here a lot of thermodynamics comes into picture, which controls the weather in the atmospheric weather conditions. Day-to-day change in the atmospheric state will be controlled by these processes, and water vapor is playing a major role in this process. So the thermodynamics, whatever you have studied or going to study or studying, I think after your BSc degree, there is not much thermodynamics other than the statistics, thermodynamics and all. But that is sufficient to apply here, and that understanding will very much helpful in studying the numerical weather prediction models and utilizing it for the predicting the state of the atmosphere. So in short, in summary, you please keep in mind that there is a balance in the energy balance which exists between the radiation received by the Earth atmospheric system in the shortwave region from sun and the terrestrial radiation emitted by the Earth, which balance is making means helping us to have a sustainable Earth atmospheric system, climate system for us to live. But any disturbance in this balance will lead to climate change, and that's what we feel, because it can be increase in the greenhouse effect, it can be increase in the composition of the atmosphere, and thereby changes in the other parameters like the clouds, the surface. Now you know that the surface is continuously changing with the technology, especially this JCB's advent of that. There is a lot of land use changes. Now most of the satellite data, there is a lot of satellites are in space to understand the changes in the land use pattern, which is affecting the system in a very significant way, and what are the possible changes which may happen. There is a lot of scope. Now coming back to the my field, which is aerosols. Aerosols are actually the particles suspended in the atmosphere. We were talking in the atmosphere consists of, that different gaseous forms like nitrogen 78%, or 21% of oxygen, and around 0.9% of argon. So 99.9% is by these three, and around 0.1% is these all other trace gases like water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, then all kinds of other species like carbon monoxide, ozone, and then what all things you name, it will be there in the atmosphere in different concentration and playing a major role. In addition, these are all gaseous forms. In addition to that, due to several human processes, anthropogenic process, which is called human man-made process, as well as natural process, a lot of particles are also getting injected into the atmosphere. It can be due to sea salt produced by sea spray, then volcanic eruptions, intense burning happening all over the world, like forest fire, biomass burning, factories, which is purely human vehicles. Anything you do, you inject so much of particles into the atmosphere, which is very small in size. We are not worried about the larger particles, which settles in minutes. Particles above 1 micrometer, we are not worried. Particles up to 1 micrometer, which stays in the atmosphere for longer duration. Especially in the lower atmosphere, in the first 2 kilometers, particles below 1 micrometer can stay for a period of 7 days. And if it is above 2 kilometers, once particles injected through atmospheric processes, it is taken to higher altitude, about 2 kilometer, 5 kilometer, 6 kilometer altitude. It stays for weeks. And at above 5 kilometer, it stays for months. And once it reaches stratosphere, it stays for years. So these particles can stay in the atmosphere for longer lifetime, depending on its size and where it is located. Basically, understanding this, the vertical distribution of aerosol is one of the most important and most, in the climate point of view. We have several tools, I told you, like aircrafts, balloons, LIDAR, the light detection and ranging. Of course, then both ground-based LIDAR is available and space-borne satellite-based LIDAR data is available. So with the help of that, we can get a distribution of aerosols. We can try to get it. Now, only these technologies are helping us to get this information. Now, once you know the aerosol concentration, what is the number of particles or so the size distribution, the sizes, different size ranges of particles, there are several ways to get that. The most important thing is actually what is the composition of this particle is also very important. That comes the chemistry, composition. I have a very good chemistry lab in SPL, an excellent chemistry lab, to study the chemical composition of aerosols. So what is the importance of that? We know that the interaction of radiation in any wavelength, it depends with the particles or any matter, it depends on the dielectric properties, which is basically the refractive index of the particles. To know the refractive index, you should know the composition. So if you know the composition, you can derive refractive index, and then you can have estimations of different assessment you can make. So you need to understand the composition of the aerosols, not only for this understanding the aerosol radiation interaction. It is important to understand the source processes also and chemical processes in the atmosphere, which is very involved. Now, so based on the type of aerosols, whether it scatter radiation back to space or whether it absorbs radiation within the atmosphere, means the shortwave radiation coming from the sun, it interacts with the particles, the aerosols. Aerosols are nothing but the particles suspended in the atmosphere, which stays in the atmosphere for longer lifetime. So this I have broadly, or we can broadly classify into 2 particles which can scatter radiation. These are normally sulfate, nitrates, and organics. These scatter because you know that the refractive index is a complex parameter. It has a real parameter, real part and imaginary part. You have studied electromagnetic theory where you have seen that the K vector is an imaginary vector, K, the wave vector. So the real part of that wave vector, which is corresponds to the refractive index. So you know that it determines when radiation interacts with the medium, whether it is scatter the radiation or the absorption. So when the electromagnetic wave passes through the medium, if the real part of that K vector, the wave vector, is quite significant, then what will happen? There can be change in the pattern. It gets particles, there is a discontinuity in that, and then it interacts, and then it scatters the photons to different directions. But if the imaginary part means the amplitude of the intensity, the photon's intensity will get reduced. That means absorption happens. So there is these 2 processes are happening, which is purely physics problem, and depends on that. The aerosols can be classified into 2 aerosols which scatter radiation, which is the brighter side because the scatter radiation back to space and Earth looks brightened. If you look at Earth, if there are a lot of scattering aerosols in the atmosphere, and if you look at Earth from space, and Earth looks bright. But if there are a lot of absorbing aerosols like black carbon, which comes from burning, any type of burning, whether it is vehicular burning within the engine, whether it is any type of burning, emit a lot of black colored carbon material into the atmosphere, which absorbs radiation. The dust which contains so much of iron also absorbs radiation. There is something called the brown carbon, which also absorbs radiation. These are all leads to warming in the atmosphere, which is if you such particles are more in the atmosphere, it leads to warming. So aerosols can be broadly classified into two based on its interaction with electromagnetic radiation, scattering and absorbing type of radiation. And so now understanding this is very important. How the radiation interacts with the aerosols. So especially the scattering and absorption. So when you take a single aerosol particle, we assume it's spherical. Naturally, it may not be spherical. We used to, with the help of electron microscope, which you also may be doing it in your projects, or MPhil students may be doing it for research. You have the electron microscope. Basically, we use scanning electron microscope SEM to get the shape of the particles. We collect the samples on filters, and then we take some image of the particles and find out what are the shapes of the particles, which is very important when we deal with this electromagnetic radiative transfer. There are mostly particles will not be spherical, it is different shapes, but we assume that particles are spherical for our theoretical convenience. So if you consider as spherical particles, when a stream of photons comes and interacts with this particle, there's several processes happening. You know that refraction will happen, diffraction will happen, then scattering will happen, symbol scattering. Then depending on the wavelength, there can be reflection from the particle surface, there can be Raman scattering, there can be fluorescent emissions. But all this process, though it is happening, and there is of course absorption also, and if absorption leads to thermal emission also by the particles. But the relative intensity of these processes are all different. Mostly happening is scattering. So the scattered intensity can be measured. In particles, we know it is a lot of particle sizes. So these processes are happening one by one. We call it is not single scattering. It will be a multiple scattering. Stream of photons comes, interacts with particles, scattered. The scattered photons will get again scattered by other particles. So we call it as multiple scattering. So you cannot, treat this problem as a single issue. You need to use the help of very complex theoretical understanding is required. So the scientist who derived this theory is actually called is a person named Gustav Mie. He has brought out with the help of electromagnetic theory. This particular theory is not there in our MSc curriculum as of now. I think master's curriculum. The Mie scattering theory, once you have an understanding on the electromagnetic theory, you can derive the Mie scattering theory. We can understand that, and we can derive the coefficients. So when there is a system of aerosols present in the atmosphere, you can find when a stream of photons comes, what is the scattering coefficient, what is the absorption coefficient. And if you have the vertical distribution of this parameter, you can calculate what is the integrated extinction coefficient. We call it as aerosol optical depth. So the theory is derived by Gustav Mie. Those who are interested, you can study Mie scattering. In fact, you have studied Rayleigh scattering, where the wavelength of the radiation is very small compared to the size of the scatterer. We call that type of scattering is called Rayleigh scattering. Normally in the atmosphere, the blue sky is due to Rayleigh scattering, which is nothing but a special case of Mie scattering. So Mie scattering is actually the whole theory will be explained very nicely. Of course, Raman scattering will not be, because that is a quantum mechanical, which is a process where it is an inelastic scattering. But in the case of an elastic scattering processes, the Mie scattering theory is sufficient to understand the scattering process and derive the parameters required to understand how much is the radiation, what is the fraction of radiation gets scattered and absorbed within the atmosphere. So way aerosols are important. The optics of the aerosol is, as I told you, that when we look at the lifetime of aerosols in the atmosphere, depends on the size of the aerosols, the lifetime vary. You can see that particles with a size from 100 nanometer to 1 micrometer stays in the atmosphere for longer time. There is a flat, here it is flat region is representing the longer lifetime. Particles normally between 100 nanometer to say about 1 micrometer comes in this range. And if you see, I have shown the scattering efficiency. You can see that particles with that size range scatter very efficiently according to Mie theory. So the particles having longer lifetimes in the atmosphere very efficiently interact with the solar radiation. That's what I have shown here. Those who understood, otherwise you can keep this in mind. When we talk about aerosol radiation interaction, especially with the solar radiation, particles having longer lifetime, which is between 100 nanometer to 1 micrometer, interact very efficiently with the solar radiation. That means the aerosols in the atmosphere can scatter radiation back to space or absorb, depends on the refractive index of the particle or the composition of the particle. Thereby, it has the ability to disturb the radiation balance. That is why aerosols are considered to be one of the most efficient climate forcing agent, which is realized in the last 20-25 years. Though theoretical understanding was there, experimental facilities were limited. With the help of technology, now we are able to understand it is in very. So there is a panel called Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change under United Nations. They keep on publish reports every 4 years. The first report, when it came in 91, there was no mentioning of aerosols. Later, there were a lot of studies. When it came in last 2007, 2013, and the next report is due, if you see, the aerosols are considered one of the most important parameter, one of the most important constituent in the atmosphere which can affect the climate. So what are the processes? So I will just quickly go through, because I have under 10 minutes I will finish it. So what are the possible process? I explained to you that aerosols can scatter radiation back to space and absorb radiation within the atmosphere and thereby affect the radiation balance. This is called direct radiative forcing. Through direct radiative forcing means a stream of photons comes from sun, interacts with the aerosols, depends on the composition of the aerosol. If there is scattering aerosol, a lot of photons get scattered back to space. If it is absorbing type of aerosol, it can absorb. But whether it is scattering or absorption, the radiation balance can be affected, and that is called direct radiative forcing. But there is another process. Then we may think that if you reduce the aerosol, we have balance. But we cannot, through natural process, there are aerosols in the atmosphere. These aerosols are very useful also. You know that for the clouds to form, we have a lot of water vapor in the atmosphere. But that water vapor will not convert to cloud unless there is aerosols. The dynamics, the thermodynamics of that is explained by Kohler with the help of two simple relation. You have studied Kelvin effect and Raoult's law. Kelvin effect is actually a curvature effect, which you have studied in thermodynamics. When there is a curvature because of the surface tension and things like that, there is something called the Kelvin effect. And Raoult's law depends on the composition of the solution-solute ratio. In that, so when you combine this, we can find out how water vapor gets condensed on a particle. The theory can be evolved, which is evolved by a scientist called Kohler. We call it as Kohler theory. So according to the Kohler theory, we can derive the cloud condensation efficiency of the particles and how many particles gets converted, how much of the particles cloud numbers will be formed in the atmosphere. Those things can be derived now with the help of this theory. Now with that, we know that if there are so much of aerosols in the atmosphere, the aerosols will water vapor, that it is a constant, it won't change with time. So for a definite amount of water vapor, if there is more number of aerosols, what will happen? This water vapor will be distributed to a larger number of aerosols. Thereby the cloud amount will be large, but the cloud droplet size will be small. So it will not form as rain. First of all, it inhibits rain. More than that, when there is a larger cloud distribution, the radiation will be reflected back, because the available radiation for Earth to which is supposed to come the Earth's surface will be reduced, and this is called the first indirect effect, or TOMI. The scientist named TOMI has derived this theory. It's called the first indirect TOMI effect. There is another thing called the second indirect effect, which is actually it will inhibits the rain also. So which is called because if there is particle size, cloud particle size is very small, it will not form rain. That also is a problem. It will affect the hydrological cycle. So if you increase the aerosols in the atmosphere, it can lead to indirect effects also. Another important thing is actually the absorbing particles, which is mostly in the South Asian region or Asian region. We use a lot of coal, or the now there is a lot of discussion on the energy sources which can increase, basically the emits black carbon from the fossil fuel sources. So when this kind of particles becomes part of the cloud system, the clouds will get burned off, which is called second indirect effect. And there is another so much of processes in that, because the absorbing aerosol will be coated by sulfate aerosols, which we call it as mixing state of aerosol. The mixing state, once it changes, it can help to for the second indirect, semi-direct effect. So thereby affects the lifetime of the clouds. So I have told you about first direct effect, direct effect, first indirect effect, second indirect effect, and semi-direct effect. These are the effects through which aerosol affects the climate. So understanding this process involves so much of theoretical requirements, So I will directly go to that. So this is called a simple radiative transfer equation. You might not have studied this, which is actually when a stream of photons enters a medium, how these photons get scattered and how it gets absorbed is decided by the radiative transfer processes. But this radiative transfer processes can be derived with the help of radiative transfer equation. This is the most simplest form. If you enlarge it, this is the it's a complicated equation where you have the differential equation as well as integral. Those who are very good in mathematics understand that this is a very complex equation where both differential and integral take together. This is an integral differential equation. But you know that Subramanian Chandrasekhar, one of the all-time great scientists, has solved this equation with the help of discrete ordinate radiative transfer theory. He has explained this theory in this book, Chandrasekhar's radiative transfer book. So now this theory is available to us. We are using this theory because now it is in the computer code. We get this radiative transfer, thing, and with the help of that, we are able to derive. So whatever I told, these parameters like the extinction coefficient and optical depth, if you know the scattering coefficient and absorption coefficient, you can derive the value of omega, which is called single scattering albedo. Angular distribution of scattered intensity is called a phase function, which can be derived. Optical depth can be derived. Then we can estimate how much is the radiation, what is the fraction of radiation scattered back to space, how much gets absorbed, what is the kind of processes which can lead to climate change can be derived with the help of radiative transfer theory. And now with the help of satellite and other ground-based observation, we can get a very good understanding of the distribution of aerosol around the globe. This is NASA simulation based on satellite data. This is different colors corresponds to different types of aerosols. You have desert dust, you have sea salt, you have smoke, you have sulfate particles. Once you have a global understanding, you can derive the different climate processes in the how aerosol affects the climate can be derived. So now the other topics, the further, I have reached only the halfway of this talk, of course, but now it's almost an hour. I can spend time to interact with you now based on this. Further, I can give another talk when Subodh sir is arranging some talk in future. The rest of the portion I will explain later. Now I am available for interaction to you. If you have any question, you can ask me now. It's almost 11 o'clock, so now we will spend some time on the topics on the area which we have discussed as of now. I can, because instead of giving a one way, I can talk a lot, but it will go above you after some time. So it's very preliminary, I have told. So now I can discuss with you. So if you have any question, now you can ask. On what
so you can ask the question. You can ask the sir. There are questions on the chat box.
Okay, I will see that. Please explain recent research scope in this field, Devika. So Devika and for others, it's only to atmospheric physics or only in the aerosols or atmospheric physics in general. So I think it is better to talk on the atmospheric physics in general because aerosol is one of the part of that. In the research scope is quite big. So now we know that one area is of course the climate change research. The Prime Minister's action plan for science, the recently constituted a committee where we all are contributing to that. They have identified a few areas now for the country to look on. Of course, nuclear physics and astrophysics, nanoscience, and